were going to develop a new master plan. And I'll tell you, just like in many other states, if we took every plan or report that was developed and we actually dumped them on the coast, we'd probably have a pretty resilient coast because there have been so many of them that have not been properly acted on. But we developed a new master plan, and these are the 5 objectives that we determined. Flood protection, natural processes are promoting a sustainable coastal ecosystem, mimicking those natural processes that Mother Nature used to actually build our entire state of Louisiana, that deltaic plain process. Coastal habitats, recognizing that the ecosystem productivity, the birds, the wildlife, were absolutely critical to our economy and to our culture in South Louisiana. The cultural heritage. Many folks go to New Orleans because of the amazing food, the amazing music, the amazing culture. And we can't allow that to be dissolved or for that to be destroyed. And the last is that you can have this incredibly productive environment, you can have these incredibly safe areas, but if you don't have industry, if you don't have employment opportunities, then you've really missed something. So recognizing we need to work with industry to identify their priorities. What we did is, for the first time ever, we took 7 different modeling systems and integrated them. And I know these are weedy words, and some folks here really like this and other folks don't, but what we did is we recognized that you can't go in and just look at a problem and develop a solution only for that problem. For example, as I'll note in a minute, you can't just say, okay, we're flooding, so we're going to build levees. Well, when you build levees, you also obstruct tidal flow. You also obstruct wildlife ingress and egress. So you can have adverse consequences. So that was the idea of integrating the models. So you can take projects or project portfolios in a basin, and you can run them through the modeling system, and you can get outputs. Hey, this does a phenomenal job at increasing alligator production, but over here, it destroys oyster habitat, or it lowers your level of hurricane protection. So these were kind of the key decision points. Flood risk reduction and land building were the key drivers. We set a realistic budget and funding. As a matter of fact, one of the first things we did in this plan is we took previous plans were put together, and we started trying to associate projects with them. These previous plans identified visions for coastal Louisiana. So we took those plans and said, okay, how about if we actually develop projects to achieve the objectives of these plans? We literally got to over $300 billion in projects, and we realized that it was a farce. We could not credibly deliver those plans, those goals that were set in the past. So what we did is we said, you know what, we've got to stop lying to people. We've got to tell them the truth. And so we spent several months calculating all sorts of different funding sources and determined that $50 billion was the right level. It was an achievable figure. We determined how much fresh water we had to maintain the right ecology or the right salinity or fresh or brackish areas in our coast to maintain the maximum ecological productivity. We looked at how much sediment we had in the river systems to actually reestablish that delta building process, which, by the way, because of locks and dams in the upper river system, is now probably 40 to 50% of the historic average, another adverse consequence of actions in a vacuum. We developed a prioritization or a planning tool where we went into 5 basins in coastal Louisiana working with the communities, and this is indicative of the various metrics that we used. But we walked in and we sat down with representatives of the community and said, tell us what's important to you. And so it could be, well, we want to have amazing shrimp production, or we want to sequester greenhouse gases, or we want to remove nutrients from the river system in order to reduce the dead zone size. Obviously, we want to have flood protection. And so, but in the different basins, certain things were more important to others. Some wanted oysters, some wanted alligators. And you work with the community to fine-tune your metrics or your modeling system to address the priorities of that basin. So then we ran the projects and project portfolios through this model, and we developed our master plan. And I know that's really small, but across the bottom, we used various tools in the tool set. Everything from the pink or purplish lines up there, those are levee alignments. And I'd love, just as I'm sure you would, to have some type of organic coast where you say it's all natural systems and it's sustainable, it's resilient. But the reality is the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya River systems were engineered. And I don't think taking the levees down on the river is an option for us. So we're going to continue to have some degree of engineered systems. But over half of our plan is making investments in natural features, in things like reconnecting the river system with the adjacent floodplains, trying to mimic that delta building process. Rebuilding our barrier islands, all the green area is actually new marsh creation projects or marsh restoration projects. The brown lines, the brown lines are restoring ridges, and then I think it's the purplish that you see up over to the right and up here in the middle. Those are actually engineered oyster reefs that I'll talk about in a minute. So various efforts here that are all integrated. The point is, there's not one single solution. So if you look at storm surge and you only rely upon levees, you end up with situations like this, where the levee as the sole protection feature ends up causing flooding. If you come in with a multifaceted approach, and there are actually even other ones, this is indicative of some of them, you end up, by doing restoration work of the various features in there, you end up tempering storm surge throughout the system to where your levee isn't taking as much of a hit. So through the implementation of our plan, we can potentially bring down annual losses from the projected $23 billion down to $5 billion. We can actually turn over the trajectory of land loss and actually have land gain by 2042 annually. So to date, we've built or improved about 160 miles of levees. We've restored about 19,000 acres of our coastal wetlands. We've been able to pull together over $17 billion in federal, state, and local not-for-profit funds by better management. The hurricane protection system repairs in the New Orleans area. This is the largest pumping station in the world. About 20,000 cubic feet per second. Here it is. This is the Lake Bourne surge barrier, one of the navigation gates. That wall going up to the right is just an absolutely amazing, about a $1.2 billion structure. This is about a $50 million floodgate we built. Here's some of the barrier islands. We actually built a 21-mile pipeline from the Mississippi River bringing sediment out here. Schofield Island, another one. Caminada Headlands, where we're pumping. So structural and non-structural. Here's one of the areas where we reconnected the river, and watch what happens from here to there by just simply allowing inputs from the river system. And New Orleans land bridge to all sorts of investments. So here you go. This is what you guys, I think, asked me to come for. And this is from Louisiana's perspective. But what doesn't work? Well, if you think about it, the first thing you do in a disaster is you stop following the rules. The first thing you do in recovery is you stop following the rules. I think it really makes you begin to wonder, are the rules appropriate? We have a crisis in Louisiana, but Hurricane Sandy and other vulnerabilities, other disasters indicated that it's not just Louisiana. We have coastal crisis all over the country. These projects in some cases take decades to implement. The crisis is today. We've got to act quickly. The President signed Executive Order 13604, which established this dashboard for certain projects, created a venue for various federal agencies to come together to work to ensure the permitting process progressed. That's a model that should be used not just for the project selected for the dashboard, but for all important projects around the country, where you have the various agencies at the table. There's an accountability mechanism instead of saying, damn EPA. They're at the table to participate. The next thing is, I talked about the current project development process and implementation process. The Corps of Engineers is the current lead agency for water resource projects. If you go through their project process, from the study authorization to the chief's report, to the authorization to the funding process, you're looking somewhere around 40 years on average to develop a project. Which community, which coastal community in your areas has 40 years to wait for that project? I don't think anybody has examples. Number 4, in many cases we try and find the perfect solution. We try and absolutely dot every I, cross every T, when the reality is these are dynamic coastal environments. You have a hurricane come through, the landscape has changed. The science evolved, your project has changed. Go in with a 70% solution. Use a robust monitoring and adaptive management process and implement projects. You're not going to be able to achieve perfection. Waiting to invest until after disaster strikes. Hurricane Sandy resulted in $60 billion in funding for New York and New Jersey. Think about what half of that could have done invested proactively. Bill noted earlier that Hurricane Katrina, if you add up the 2005 storms, Katrina and Rita, and the disasters we had in the Gulf Coast, Congress spent and developed programs valued at about approximately $150 billion. That is absurd, when we could have taken probably $12 billion, invested on the front end, and saved 90% of those lives that were lost, and prevented 90% of the economic disruption that happened in that area. Number 6, Devising solutions for a single problem or to a single problem in a vacuum. The Corps of Engineers built levees on the Mississippi River, as I noted earlier. Great solution for flood control. It's been devastating to our coastal ecosystem. You've got to look more broadly, and you've got to have the stakeholders at the table. Number 7, you have a divided mission. You have all these various agencies, and you see the alphabet soup up there. It provides a mechanism for folks to point fingers at one another. Again, the OMB won't let us do this. CEQ said no. U.S. Fish keeps writing us mean letters. You've got to have a venue where folks can all collaborate and you can have accountability. Number 8, states, local governments, and stakeholders are on the sidelines. Not just because you need their input, but also, as in the parenthetical, things like zoning are important tools in your tool chest. If you have folks out there building skyscrapers in these developments in vulnerable areas, it puts liability on you and your program to go out there and protect them. Prevent that from happening. Do smart growth, smart building. Use all those tools, which in Louisiana, those are parish or county authorities, not state, not federal. And so there's a relationship there. Segregating similar programs by agency. I noted earlier that we've been able to pull together over $17 billion. That is almost 40 different funding sources from various federal agencies. And it's because in Louisiana we have a common thread of our agency now doing everything related to the coast. So when Natural Resource Conservation Service tries to go do this over there, no, come back, we're going this way. And everything comes through that program. The last one, missing schedules and budgets. One of the most dangerous things in the world, in my opinion, is going into a community and getting your authorized project and saying, okay, folks, we have this billion-dollar levee project or hurricane protection project or resiliency project we're going to build. But then the implementation of it ends up taking 30 years. This community is making decisions based upon that project or that investment that is not happening or not going to happen or take forever. You've got to provide some certainty and communicate those. And to give you an example, in Louisiana, we have a project for hurricane protection. Corps of Engineers has studied for 20 years, spent $72 million, and the project cost went from $886 million in 2007 to their latest cost estimate of $10.3 billion for the same project. You're pricing people out of protection. So what works? What we did in Louisiana is we formed a new board of directors for the coast, in effect. We formed a state agency that brought our Fish and Game Agency, our Natural Resource Agency, our Environmental Quality Agency, our Insurance Agency, our Agriculture and Forestry Agency, our Homeland Security Agency. We brought regional stakeholders, parish presidents, county supervisor equivalent, and other representatives to a board of directors. We have a 20-person board that is, we meet monthly. There's an accountability venue. If our Fish and Game Department keeps stopping a project because we're going to affect oyster habitat for 500 oysters, but at the same time the project's going to protect 500 people, let's have that discussion in public. Let me see the Secretary of Fish and Game tell those 500 people that the oysters are more important when there may be relocation opportunities that are much easier for the oysters. It works really, really well to have that. It allows you to integrate or commingle funds. You've got to have those public meetings to deliberate, allow for public input, discuss policy options and trade-offs, and it's a venue for accountability. Excuse me, Mr. DEQ, you said you were going to have this report by October 15th, and having those discussions in public, it forces people to act. And that's not just at the state level. Go back to the federal level. I think it's important as well. Number 3, establishing prioritization metrics that reflect the regional, state, and local values. And I showed you our example. Our example doesn't work here. It doesn't. I'm not going to pretend like it does. But you've got to develop a metric where you can show why we only chose $50 billion in projects versus 300. Why that $250 billion worth of projects weren't selected. Let me show you why. Because the cost of benefit does this. Because the environmental consequences of your project does this. It's not because we don't believe you should be protected or you're not important. It's because we've got a limited revenue source, revenue stream, resources, and we've got to prioritize. That doesn't mean that the parishes or whoever